Party, for the Green Party, have been very disillusioned by the whole process of the mentoring coalition. So we're very much cognizant of that experience, and in this situation we want to present our vision for left government and what the consequence of that might be. So I'm not going to speak any further. So we've three speakers today. Richard Boyd Barrett, TD for Dún Laoghaire, Councillor Hazel de Nortoon, who's a councillor from Dublin City Council, and because we're a 32 county party, Jerry Carroll, who has come from Belfast and is an MLA representing West Belfast. So I'll introduce Richard first of all to outline what our vision of a left government is.
Yeah, well, the purpose of this pamphlet is to provoke what we think is a very necessary and urgent debate about what sort of government, what sort of politics do we need if we are going to change Irish society and address the really dire crisis we are now facing in housing, in healthcare, in the cost of living, and in many, many other areas of society where, despite being one of the richest countries in the world, working class people are really suffering. And the establishment of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have let people down on the most basic things of providing them with a secure, affordable roof over their head, a decent health service that actually functions, or addressing the crucifying cost of living that ordinary people are now facing. And a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is, out from an election, we think there has to be a very, very serious discussion about how we solve the housing crisis, the health crisis, the cost of living crisis, what sort of politics are necessary, and critically how we provide an alternative to the failed politics of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that have led us into this crisis. And to put it very simply, if you look at the failure of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael on all of the big issues that are facing Irish society, housing, healthcare, the cost of living, there's a very common pattern, which is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael do not want to stand up to the wealthy, the powerful, the corporate landlords, the vulture funds, the profiteering energy companies, those who have interests in making profit out of private healthcare, and that is why they are completely incapable of solving the problems that are facing our society. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are representatives of the corporate interests and the very wealthy who are benefiting from the crises that are affecting ordinary people, and therefore they have no intention of actually addressing them. So we think the only way you can actually change things and solve the problems facing ordinary people in Irish society is to break the cycle of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and have a left government. And we are keen to urge other parties in opposition, particularly those on the left, to set out with the objective of creating a left government, a genuinely left government that does not involve Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, because we think as long as parties that are claiming to bring about change again and again end up propping the parties of the establishment like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael up, they will disappoint and demoralise people and will fail to bring the change that is necessary. So we're urging others on the left, Sinn Féin, the Social Democrats, other left independents, to now set out with the objective of creating a left government and saying definitively that come the next election and after the next election, we will not be propping up further Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments. We've been down that road. It has failed every time. It has discredited the left, and we need to break that cycle if we're actually going to bring about the radical changes and implement the radical sort of policies that are necessary to make a difference to ordinary people. And I mean, I'm not going to go through all of the details of the pamphlet. People will mention bits and pieces, and people may have questions, but when you look at things like the unwillingness of the government to implement an eviction ban, to introduce rent controls, to do something about rampant land hoarding and speculation by landlords and vulture funds, it is precisely because they don't want to challenge those vested interests. And the result is that despite, numerous policy promises and plans and so on, nothing actually changes. The housing and homelessness crisis continues to get worse because they're not willing to take the measures that would really challenge the market and the vested interests in this country. And the same goes with the refusal to stand up to profiteering energy companies or private health interests who make a profit. We need to take on and challenge those interests that are a block to bringing about the radical transformation of our society that is necessary to make a real difference. So that's we're trying to provoke an argument, and we make no apologies for it. We believe there's a historic opportunity for a left government, but that all those who are trying to pose an alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have to pin their colours to the mast and set out to build a movement for a left government in this country and to definitively rule out coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. So our next speaker will be Hazelton O'Toole, who is a Dublin City Councillor, and she will talk about what a left government might mean for many people living in areas like Ballyfermot, Trimna and so on. So Hazel.
Yeah, just to follow on from the points that Richard has raised, I mean, you can't avoid the fact that people have been coming into our constituency clinics or just having general chats with us on the street that they're calling for change for a long time now, and having the effects of a right-wing government for decades now. You can see the effects of that playing out within the community. I know Ballyfermot would have been in the press a few times over the last while. It wasn't reflective of the great stuff that happens out there or of the broader community, and that's the piece that I think we need to get behind a left government, that we can then support communities to engage on the ground effective change, that everybody's asking the question to see why aren't we seeing it. The effects of social policy on the likes of my community over decades now has a very detrimental effect, and if you look at reports that have commissioned on it, if you take, say, Cherry Orchard for instance, we're on our fourth plan at this stage, and every time it came around to implementation, governments have pulled the funding from under it. And I think if we are working with communities to give them the opportunity now to get behind a left government, calling people out to get behind that, we can send that message that change is possible, and rather than continuously demoralising people, we can give them that support to see the change. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I never thought that we could see a housing crisis get much worse, but year after year, I mean, it's grotesque, the stories that you're hearing coming into it about children, languishing in hotel rooms and then trying to make their cases for, if they're sitting on, say, educational behavioural tests that they need to get through waiting lists, not being able to get that effect for it, or has that implementation effect along everything else within their lives, and it starts from housing, it goes to education, it has an effect on health, and we just can't keep continuing the way that we're doing and just giving people piecemeal responses to the bottlenecks that are within all of our public sector. There's been an erosion on the public sector for decades now, and I think we need to see the change. As I said, we need to see people coming out behind that. People need to be brave, and they need to name where they're going to stand on that. Other than that, I would be fearful as where we would be going next time round in the election if people are going to see the support about getting behind change and left-wing government.
Okay, thank you very much, Hazel. And just to reiterate again, our main purpose here is to indicate that we think it's possible to have a left-wing government in this country without Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. It's going to have to be campaigned for, and it would make a real difference to working class areas which have suffered under the rule of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael for now 100 years. Okay, our next speaker is Jerry Carroll, who is an MLA for West Belfast. He's travelled all the way down from West Belfast today to indicate how a left government would have impacts in terms of partition and indeed in terms of the North generally.
Thanks, Kieran. Our starting point is that this state is a dystopian nightmare for all working class people. Hundreds of thousands of people cannot afford or get a home. Wages have been stagnating for years, and people are routinely denied healthcare due to lack of means of wealth and money in their bank account. They're still subject to the interference of church in public and private affairs. However, there's a groundswell of opposition against this current state of affairs, and obviously it was most strongly evidenced in the last election, where a majority of people didn't vote for the two traditional conservative right-wing parties. And I think the next election offers us and the people of the state a historic opportunity to boot these parties out. But we're also seeing that desire for an alternative Ireland expressed on the streets as well. We saw it a number of weeks ago on the huge anti-racist demonstration on the streets of Dublin. And the day-to-day issues that impact people in the south are the exact same issues that affect people in the north day to day. A left government could play a decisive role in reshaping politics on this island away from the interest of the well-connected and the wealthy elite, and in the interest of the vast majority of people on this island. The strike wave that we've seen recently in the north not only has the chance to address long-term issues of wages stagnating and the crisis in public services, but also is the arena where we can push back against sectarian ideas and overcome sectarianism by bringing people together. Catholic, Protestant, migrants are already standing together and aren't waiting for Stormont to get its act together. So I think this document is very, very important today, and I'm happy to be down here to help launch it.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. So I'll now take questions on the issue. I'll try to give it to a number of speakers to field.
Just move the mics with speakers.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, say again?
To move the mics around.
For the speakers.
Yeah.
Okay, yourself?
Richard, the elephant in the room, I suppose. There's an elephant here, but anyway.
Small.
I thought it was a misprint yesterday, really, when I saw the invite going out, the letter that you'd sent, obviously, to other left-leaning groups and parties, and you didn't even mention them there today in your speech as well. So, do you not think Labour is a left-wing party at all?
I think the Labour Party burnt their bridges with working class people in the government that they entered with Fine Gael between 2011 and 2016. They utterly demoralised working class people by entering a government promising that it was going to do something about austerity, to burn bondholders, and then they turned around in that government and inflicted the most cruel austerity on people, and they frankly have not been forgiven by ordinary people on the ground. And they haven't even really put their hands up and said, we made a dire mistake, and apologised for what they did. And I think if they don't learn the lesson of the terrible blunder and betrayal that they were guilty of in that government, I can't see how they can play any part in creating a genuine left alternative to Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And I don't think, to be honest, working class people feel that they can play a part in that after the bitter experience of that government.
So just to be clear, you're saying that Labour is not welcome in a left-leaning government? I
think ordinary people simply wouldn't trust them after what happened between 2011 and 2016. I mean, the savage assault on single parents, the cuts in public sector pay, the decision of Labour ministers to stop building public housing. I mean, these were absolutely diabolical decisions that have left us with a very, very bitter legacy and a lot of suffering. So I just don't think people have forgiven them for that. And they haven't apologised for what they've done. So I just don't see how they could play a credible part in trying to build an alternative to the establishment that have let ordinary people so badly down.
But you can't be calling for left unity, though, Richard, just to follow on from Fergal's point. You can't be calling for left unity when you're picking and choosing who are your ideological enemies and who must be thrown overboard for the left lifeboat.
First of all, I think...
in terms, though, isn't it? Unity, but not with them.
No, I don't think it is, because the most important unity is the unity of working people, the dispossessed, the people who've been let down, the communities that have been let down. And I'm afraid that unity would be seriously fractured if you were to involve the Labour Party after how badly they let down those communities and those working people. So we think it's really up to those who have not made that blunder and who are putting themselves forward as an alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, to definitively say we are going to create a left government that doesn't make that mistake. And that's, if you like, the debate that we want to provoke, because of course huge numbers of people now are breaking, in record numbers, huge numbers of people are breaking from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. The majority of people want something different to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and huge numbers of those people are looking to the left. So we want to make an alliance with them and the forces that are offering themselves as an alternative on the left, and say, here is the chance to create a left government that doesn't involve Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and that won't repeat the mistakes of the Labour Party and the Green Party.
Sorry, Richard, in that way, do you put the Green Party in the same boat as Labour in that respect?
Without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, they twice now they've made this disastrous mistake. I mean, the Fianna Fáil Green government, prior to the Fine Gael Labour government, slashed investment in public transport, of all things. I mean, you know, how much of a betrayal of an environmental agenda that's supposed to be directed at dealing with the climate crisis can you get than a green government, so-called, slashing investment in things like public transport? And now they've made the same mistake again of going in with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, a government that is absolutely abominably letting down working class people, failing them on the most basic things. They're discrediting the environmental agenda. We take seriously the environmental and climate agenda, and the Green Party have discredited it twice now. So we just don't see how they can be part of bringing that change, when in fact they're part of a government that is blocking the necessary change.
Okay, anybody else?
Can I ask two questions?
Yeah.
One of the suggestions we had a couple of years ago, Richard, was that in the event of a left government led by Sinn Féin, that it would be in PPP's interest to do a confidence and supply deal rather than go in, that you would support so that you could judge each policy as it went through. And Jerry, maybe to pick up on that, to what extent is Sinn Féin, to anyone in Northern Ireland, a left or centre party, or is it not an ethno-nationalist party?
Can I do the first part?
Yeah. Okay, Jerry, take the first part.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the... Keen answer, yeah. I suppose in the document we state that Sinn Féin is a contradiction. I think that's the experience in the north, especially, as much as it is in the south. I mean, my experience is that, you know, Sinn Féin members, supporters, people who vote for them, quite often want to see them to take action over things like high rents, over the cost of living crisis, over workers not getting a fair wage, and other economic and other social issues. However, when it comes to voting for these issues or pushing them through Stormont or councils, Sinn Féin are very often voting the wrong way, or quite often blocking those issues, and I can expand on examples if you want. So it's clear for me, obviously in the south, that Sinn Féin have a mandate to challenge Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, but what we're concerned about, or what we want to make sure, is that they don't prop them up in the next election. And our party are certainly not going to be a mudguard for right-wing Conservative parties. We don't think Sinn Féin should either, and that's a matter for them to be clear on. And I would say, obviously in the south, Sinn Féin have played an important role in mobilising people on the streets, like water charges and other important issues. They have played an important role alongside us to bring people out the streets. But the question really for them is, what side will they pick after the next election? They've been relentlessly attacked by right-wing parties on many issues, but they're still keeping open the possibility of putting into government with them. So what we're trying to do by launching this document today is to say that they need to set out their stall on a left-wing government. We're clearly supportive of one, advocating for one. I think Sinn Féin are sitting on the fence when it comes to it.
Jerry, did you write this document?
Did I write it? No, I did not.
Who did write it?
So first of all, this...
Did you write it?
Sorry, hold on.
It's a collaborative effort.
It's a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
Reply, right? This document has been thoroughly discussed, and different drafts have gone around, people for profit, and it has been thoroughly discussed democratically, and it's a very considered document that's taken a long time to discuss, and it's been published accordingly.
Could you explain the taxi driver, the reference to the Dublin taxi driver being part of the old thing propping up Fianna Fáil, that's it?
I think that's an historic legacy, so you better check in terms of who taxi drivers are passed over.
There was an issue, I would say, but it was a highly unusual thing to put in as a symbol of the old order, so to speak, you know?
Well, I don't mind coming back on that. I mean,
you're in lockstep with the taxi driver.
Exactly.
I was asking it.
I think in recent years there's no party that has advocated more consistently that, for taxi drivers than people before profit. But
you've been penetrated.
But the taxi drivers themselves, I think, would acknowledge that in days gone by, many of them would have, as many, I think, working class people voted for Fianna Fáil. That's a fact. So we're simply saying that the political trajectory of many taxi drivers is an indication of the change that's happening. That Fianna Fáil have lost their grip in working class areas, and we are delighted about that. And we have been to the forefront in championing many of those groups of workers who I think have seen through Fianna Fáil, and the taxi drivers are very much a case in point. So we want to continue that leftward trajectory, and we want to further expose the fact that Fianna Fáil are not a party of the ordinary working people as much as they have tried to claim they were over the years.
And to come back on that issue of, given that you have concerns, let's put it that way, in relation to Sinn Féin and possibly other parties on the left, would it not be more pure and appropriate for the party to offer confidence in supply, so that each measure that would be going would be something you consider individually and decide to be back or not?
Well, you see, we are ambitious enough and hopeful enough that we could have a left government that is genuinely going to take radical measures to transform Irish society. And so we are making an appeal to others that are putting forward left-wing policies, whether it's Sinn Féin, the Social Democrats, left independents, to grasp that opportunity and to set out to build a genuinely radical left government that is going to transform Irish society. And that's a choice that they're going to have to make. But it's no secret. I'm not telling you anything that isn't very clearly in the public domain. Sinn Féin have said that they are keeping their options open. And I think that is also true of the Social Democrats. Now, we think that's a mistake to keep open the option of possibly propping up either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, because it has been a disastrous failure in the past. So we want to provoke that debate. We make no apologies about it. We want people to debate, what is a left government? What does an alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael look like? And our argument is a left government is one that decisively breaks from propping up Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And let's have that debate.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah.
Hazel, PC na America better, you know, me no going Ken Fogwood to buy in Shaw in Shawinish. Agus William reaction fight to give us na parte LR and FK.
Well, Captain Gurkhaimid bhí art finish ribahánig na tácán sús agus Shannon Ruddy will meet ag leir leis na daoine taobh mit canter, so Caigmid éid sin ag tuairt gdí an áitse agus beidir go féiling leir agus corna ceis sin gdí na party eile rá anhfuil sibh i géirí tacht le chéile chun even leirt faoi realtas ar an taobh left ar an taobh clay. Agus ceapan go bhfuil na party sin chun smína faoi sin is chun tacht amach aniu agus beidir sin a leirbí bort nuair táid ag churann smínt sin amach sin an rud is tábhatí gur féiling a dhéanamhanis mar caiig mí rud ag na chur ras go dtíine daoine sa ceantar freisin as well. Look, you know, táid a chur na 5 na se ará tá na freigraí agah céin slé go féiling é seo obair amach, but níl míad an anna sin a dhéanamh leis an réaltas a bhí anfad na céit a bliananis.
Agus just a target on Coran is lo had dugach an loch debra no na glas and cool the geary that part of the tugger stuff cagir should know.
Well, look, you know, it's Tadini effect in a party sin and party glasags and looked eyebrows like cheating like raw, you know, nor vi chansaku talk like Mar party and Tev Clay though Rinishid kind of cost nu cuairsiad na daine mit a ceantar sin 5 na Ryanair cuairsiad an cás amach ní cuairsiad freigra den a 5 na sin, so I mthram agus beidir thorm den na party seo níl siad ar an taobh clay agus caiigimiid sin a chor rá nó tá de géirí leir a gachtainna agus fécinn deir cad bhfuil siad a géirí anmh agus feicimid cad a hála taobh with sin, but ag an áid seo níor hána géin duna chun an plán seo a chuir le chéile agus sin an rud a comid a chormach aniu.
Can I just quote from this document?
Yeah. Who you quote to?
Page 20. Mike, to the members of the...
It's like school, isn't it? Page 20, right.
Retest? Yeah, no, it's the second last paragraph, page 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, in the very final analysis, powers that big were previously outlined. will deploy the police and army to move against elected left-wing governments as they did in Chile when the first self-proclaimed Marxist Salvador Allende was elected. Obviously assassinated by the CIA. Bazooka, I believe, in his office. Is that your serious agreed opinion that the forces of wealth, aided and abetted by their co-conspirators in the Irish media, will and including the police and the army, as it says here, will move against the first Irish left-wing government? Do you honestly believe that?
I think you've got to read the whole chapter, and if you read the whole chapter, what we say.
It says in the very final analysis.
I'm coming to that. If we say, in the final analysis, the operative word. So the whole chapter states that if we have a left-wing government, we do have to recognise that elements of the Irish rich will attempt to stop any substantial reforms. In fact, we already have Michael O'Leary saying that he will pull out if there's a Sinn Féin government, which we don't necessarily think is radical enough. So that's what the point is. We then indicate, if you read it carefully, it says we know from other countries they have used this tactic. So this is the case. If you look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, that's happened, and so on. And in the final analysis, we think that the wealthy are willing to use elements of the state to undermine a left-wing government. This has happened most recently in Spain, where, for example, Podemos has false stories been planted in the media about money coming from Iran for Podemos. So we believe this is a possibility. That's all we're saying. It's a possibility in terms of any attempt to bring serious reform in Ireland.
Also, I add that as well. I mean, I mean, obviously Chile is referenced in the document, but you don't even have to go that far back. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn was nearly Prime Minister, and publicly we had army generals saying there would be a coup d'etat against Corbyn. Now, we have similar policies, to what Corbyn and the manifesto we're talking about, not obviously identical. So I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility that certain elements of the establishment in this state will cause panic and try to cause confusion if there is a left government. So I think it's honest to say that. It's dishonest not to. It's dishonest not.
Both emphasise the possibility.
Just to finish, it's dishonest not to mention that. So that's our point. But I think the antidote to that is our politics on focusing on the mobilising of the mass of people on a democratic basis to make sure that doesn't.
Yeah, one off the point now, but getting back to that, Richard, can you specifically say whether you agree or not that in the very final analysis, no possibility, they will deploy the police and army to move against the elected left-wing government? I mean, don't forget that the police and the defence forces are obliged to defend the state with its democratically elected government, at its heart, even though the president will be normally the commander-in-chief. Do you agree that the forces of wealth and reaction will deploy the police and army to move against? This is what the document states. In the final analysis, they will deploy the police and army to move against the elected left-wing government. Do you really believe that?
Well, for example, when 1,000 Debenhams workers were fighting for their just rights over their redundancy, their collective redundancy agreement, we saw the police deployed in the most horrendous fashion against mostly women, middle-aged and older women workers dragged around a picket line where they were peacefully protesting in the most horrendous way. Hold on, just let me finish. You asked the question, Senator. We saw at the anti-racist demonstration that was People Before Profit played a very central part in building a pretty impressive alliance of people to stand up against the toxic politics of the far right. 2 weekends ago, we saw a quite extraordinary incident where the police went along and tried to prevent members of ours distributing leaflets arguing against racism. So do we think it is possible that elements in the state will use their position to try and undermine a government that was radically challenging vested interests? Yeah, we think it's almost a racing certainty that elements in the state and at the top of Irish society will do everything they can to try and undermine a left government. So I mean, and by the way, every single instance you care to mention of radical left governments challenging for power or actually coming into government have witnessed moves by elements in the state and the establishment to try and undermine those governments.
But you might have thrown in the water protest and the installation of meters and so on, and the role of the Gardaí as well. But in the instances you've quoted, it's been a case of the Gardaí, leaving aside the Defence Forces, acting on behalf of the state, if you like, and of the right-wing government. Now you're suggesting that those very same Gardaí, and the Defence Forces would move against the left-wing government.
Well, I think you're assuming that the state is some sort of absolutely homogeneous bloc. It's not, right? There's Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have spent very many years, if you like, trying to deepen their roots within every single area of the state and society. And the idea that if a left-wing government was going to come to power and was going to seriously challenge vested interests and wealth inequality in this country, that they wouldn't try and use their influence and positions of power to try and undermine a left-wing government. I think, to be honest, it would be fantasy to imagine that wasn't the case. We've given you the answer.
But Salvador Allende is in the document. Are you seriously suggesting that it would go as far as assassination?
You made that point. Can we have the next person, your next question? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, next question. Go on. Did you have a question? Yeah.
No.
Sorry. Okay.
Quick thing on policy. Commission of taxation, and I think it's widely accepted, one of the big dividers in society. Two of them actually. One is property, and the other is inheritance. And in both those instances, as I understand them, correct me if I'm wrong, the intention would be to abolish the property tax and no changes to be made to the inheritance taxation regime, where about 350 grand goes tax-free. I mean, it's all very well to talk about these forces out there. They're the real divides in our society, and you've absolutely nothing to say about it.
We have made a very consistent or developed a very consistent position on that we do not believe that people's family home is the same as the assets of the wealthy or the super rich. It's a family home, and that's why we argued very strongly against taxes on people's family homes, that property tax. What we want to see are taxes on those who own multiple properties and who generate huge amounts of profit and wealth from the ownership of large property portfolios and multiple properties. So we make a very sharp distinction, particularly in a country where working class people have historically seen quite a high level of home ownership, but that doesn't make them wealthy. There's many people who bought their council house, for example, from the local authority to give them some sort of security for them and their families. We do not consider that in the same category of wealth as people who are multimillionaires, and we make no apologies for making that distinction.
How about inheritance?
Well, it's the same point, isn't it? I mean, well, it used to be 500,000, and it is, so it's come down, and we won't be arguing for the thresholds to be increased. You can be certain of that, right? But in reality, the level of inheritance tax has actually increased proportionate to the rise in property values. And we're not arguing, and nor will we be arguing for increasing those thresholds. But we're not proposing to impose further tax burdens on working class people who maybe bought a council home or bought a modest home. We don't see that as in any way part of the problem of wealth inequality in this country, and we're the only people who've actually argued for serious wealth taxes on those who have real wealth. And I think it's worth noting that Oxfam are now proposing a wealth tax that is very, very similar to the one that people before profit have been advocating for about the last decade.
Could I just urge that you'll find our policy on taxation on our website, which details exactly how we intend to tax wealth and capital, and back up the points that Richard has made here. It's on the website, our taxation policy. Anybody else? No. Okay.